So you are freshly back from your venture out to the middle of the country. You got to see a Twins game.
Yeah.
And you got to meet a lot of different people that very much love the game of baseball.
Well, that's exactly right. So I've been a member of SABR for 4 years, and I don't really know what prompted me to be a member in the first place. It wasn't expensive. I think it was $65 a year, so it's
not very expensive.
Not prohibitive.
A couple bucks a month.
Exactly. And the what it was about research, because that's what SABR is, right? It's the Society of American Baseball Research. And I'm thinking, okay, so I guess it doesn't include when they started it up, all those years ago. This was the 52nd convention, so it even goes back further than that. I don't think they were concerned with Japanese baseball and
Which
Korean
was going
baseball.
on at the time. They just were not concerned.
Korean baseball league wasn't there, though.
The
KBO wasn't there.
The NBP was definitely going at that point.
Definitely. So it's American Baseball Research, and a lot of people know SABR because you hear Bill James's name and
right, Sabermetrics, right, born from this from this organization, and I mean obviously that I think if you're talking about who's into baseball stats and sort of baseball nerdiness, I think that's sort of where SABR would be. They're the guys that the people that do Baseball Reference look up to.
Right. Well, and there's partnerships there. I don't want to say partnership, but there's a lot of work togetherness between Baseball Reference, and I saw Adam Dorowski, who runs the Immaculate Grid stuff. I saw Sean Foreman there. I got to say hello to him. We have had him on our podcast as well. But right, I wanted to go because I was hoping maybe I'd learn a little bit more about how to do better research, because I feel like
would it actually be? Would you actually learn the purpose of the conference? We're going there for baseball research. Will they teach you anything about it?
Yeah, I thought, well, it's going to be really nerdy. I expect, right? Because that's probably going to be some math involved, which doesn't throw me, right? Baseball's a lot about math. But really, I wanted to just experience being around other people that maybe had more nerdiness about baseball than me, is what I expected.
Right, which is no easy feat. Given
Thanks a lot.
I mean, it's true here. So I guess what was it like? You arrive, you obviously go to the opening ceremonies, but I think anybody that's ever been to any kind of convention or whatnot knows that the opening ceremony really isn't the best place to get the vibe of the convention. So you go on the first actual day. What was that first meeting like?
There was like an introductory thing for first-time members. I had that little thing on my badge where it said I'm a first-time, so that people were supposed to come up and say, "Oh, glad you're here," that kind of stuff. It was a very engaging group,
welcoming vibe.
Yeah, they really did a great job of making you feel like you were a part of something. And then so I kind of marked down the sessions I was going to go to, and what I found through the 3 days I was there was that I would think, okay, well, I'm not going to go to this one, but I put it on there just in case. I went to everyone.
Anyone you could get your hands on, you could go?
There was always something worth going to. And so the first one was with Derek Falvey.
He was given the opening remarks.
He gave the opening remarks, and he's the general manager, I guess, of the Minnesota Twins at age 41. And so he told his backstory.
But the general manager, you guess, he either is or he isn't. So he's.
I don't know if he's the Pobo. That's what I mean. But but he's basically running the Twins. And obviously, these guys are like the guys that are a little older than you, but millennials. This is an older millennial. They're so good, man. David Stearns on the Mets is the same way. Like, they know how to talk to people. They understand their audience. This guy was so prepared and so engaging and so with the vibe there of a bunch of really older people. And let's be honest, when I walked into the room the first time, I saw people there, and I think even the CEO Scott Carter said, not Scott Carter. Anyway, he said, now you look around, you might think we're old. And everybody goes, yeah, because, but, we're not as old as we look right here, right now. I guess, think about who can go to a conference like that. And
it's going to slant a little bit older.
People that aren't necessarily working, a regular job necessarily are going to have a little bit more time to do that and the inclination to. So he really understood that, Derek Falvey. And he was great. He just really engaged what it's like to be the general manager and how much technology, everybody wanted to know how much does technology play a part in what you're doing. And I was impressed with the questions from the group and the receptiveness to stuff that, that when you get to all that over-analytical stuff when it comes to the game itself, this is a group of baseball nerds talking about stuff, but they kind of push back a little bit on
being like, oh, wait, there might be too much analytics in the game. They liked it. And so then obviously, I'm sure in a room full of old guys, they were absolutely delighted when they went to the Minnesota Twins hitter panel, which they had Rod Carew and Tony Oliva on.
Yeah, well, and that was a highlight, right? Those were the guys that were put up front, like come to the convention, and you'll see. No, we didn't get to meet these guys.
But you got to hear them talk about hitting, which I imagine is pretty cool.
Yeah, these are two heroes of mine, both of them Hall of Famers. And I didn't realize that Tony Oliva is 86, and that he and Carew were roommates back, 50-odd years ago on the road trying to help each other as two sort of Latin American players. Although Carew did come to this country when he was 14, and so he became a citizen actually just a couple of weeks ago for the first time, and that was a big deal because he had talked about doing that, and he was finally able to do it. But I think it was really the thing about Carew that I love was he's up there and he's talking about hitting, and the same old tropes that we always talk about. He goes, I don't understand why guys don't use the whole field, right? If I saw it the way they were playing me, I would just hit like as if he could go out there today
and just hit it to any field he wanted to.
Like the famous one when Ty Cobb was, in
late
his
late 80s,
something. They said, well, what do you think about today's baseball? What do you think you'd hit today? And he goes, I'd hit 300. He goes, but I am a 75-year-old man.
Right.
And so Carew is kind of like I think he's
still thinking of himself
he's still thinking,
that way.
I could do this, and it just makes me. I don't know that it's easy for players of that age to understand how. On the field, the game has changed just in terms of what you're seeing and reacting to. It's hard.
Well, I think you then saw that kind of when you went to the next panel, which was the pitchers panel for the Twins, and so you had two very famous Twins pitchers up on stage, in Bert Blyleven and Jim Kaat. But then you also had, I think, current Twins pitching coach.
Well, is he the current coach?
Glen Perkins?
I think maybe he is. Yeah, he might be the pitching. I don't know if he's the pitching coach. I'm not sure about that.
I just was making sure. But then LaTroy Hawkins, who was also a more recent Twins pitcher,
and it was really cool to see the interaction between them because you had different generations. I think one guy's 41.
Right, Perkins.
Perkins is 41, and you got Jim Kaat, who's in his 80s, and and you could see the affection they had for one another, but you also could see that they didn't necessarily see everything the same way.
They didn't see eye to eye on quite everything.
No, they do and they don't. I think what they were trying to put forth, and I think the younger guys did it great. Is they're like what people taught us when we were teaching, like keep the ball down. He was talking about Gardenhire. Both of them played for Gardenhire, Hawkins and Perkins. He goes, but they found that keeping the ball down was hard for them, and it's actually when they threw up in the zone, they had more success, which is counter to what the manager's saying. Keep it down, because that's what everybody said. Keep the slider down and away.
Keep the ball down. They can't hit it. Like when that really has where the ball is in the zone, up or down, isn't good. Now the issue is that I think that people think you're more likely to miss in the middle of the plate if you're aiming for up than if you're aiming for down.
That's a good point.
But I don't think that really has any kind of impact.
Well,
you're still going to miss in the middle of the plate if you're missing.
And they made the point that look, some guys actually, can't hit the ball up, and they can actually do something with the ball away. And we treat all hitters the same. All hitters should get the ball down and away and hard. If we have all this data on these players,
right. And you're starting to see that where teams are saying, when Paul Blackburn came into the Mets are like, hey, this is your best pitch. Why aren't you throwing it more often? And so it's about now you as a pitcher being like, okay, what is the best weapon I have against this guy? That is, what's my best pitch that's his worst pitch?
Right.
Which is why sometimes guys can just be a really bad matchup for certain pitchers. Because you know what? The things that pitcher does well are the kinds of things that hitter doesn't really have a problem with, and the things that pitcher struggles with, well, that's what that hitter eats up. And that's why there's some great hitters that get eaten up by pitchers because it's exactly the reverse. Like, okay, yeah, you might be great against everybody, but this one guy happens to really exploit the holes you have in your swing.
And all of them were asked, and all of them said, so who's the guy you had the most trouble with? And who's the guy you could dominate? Right. And so they each had a guy they talked about, this guy would get up there, and he couldn't hit anybody else in the league, but he killed me. He just whatever I threw, this guy, hit it. I had no idea how to get this guy. And other guys are really good hitters. They just dominated, a guy who was like a Hall of Fame player just because that matchup just worked out
well
for them.
Right.
So Perkins also said a couple of really interesting things, I thought. And so he talked about being in the Metrodome and pitching there, and how much he liked pitching at the Metrodome because the mound was so perfect. It would never dried out because it's inside. So that it was always the same consistent. He always knew what it was. Now, that was called the Homer Dome. And so it amazed me that a pitcher that pitched in that building would, let's say, I really like pitching there because the mound is good. And nobody liked pitching there because the ball kept flying out of the damn ballpark.
That's so interesting that the mound was that big a deal.
Right.
He's like, you know what, getting to pitch off of that mound for a large majority of my games is worth it because that's going to bug me more to show up at some stadium stadium and have an inconsistent mound.
And you know, it's just harder with the conditions. And I'll talk a little bit about when we went on the field at Target Field. We did a tour of the stadium, and we got to meet with the head's groundskeeper.
So what was that?
Well, let me just finish the last thing about Perkins. So he says the other thing, and this is he was not talking to you, but kind of what you say. So they said, what about pitcher injuries? And he goes, well, you know, here's what I think. You know, it puts a lot of stress on your arm, and then he said the fastball puts the most stress on the arm.
Which I would always guess it's a slider, but
you always hear that,
right? But I guess
pitcher.
it kind of makes sense. It's also the fastball because we're seeing more arm injuries and we're throwing more harder fastballs than ever.
And his contention was that because the mound is high and where it is, that puts more stress on the elbow. And if you pitched on flatter ground, they couldn't generate the torque and the stress on the elbow off flatter ground. Now, what he didn't say, so lower the mound is basically what he said,
right?
Which was the simplest thing to do when you think about, you know, you've talked about move the mound back a foot.
Right, but lowering the mound doesn't require because I think people don't appreciate just how much it would mess with pitchers if you move the mound literally back a foot. Like it would be like relearning how to do the art for them. Lowering the mound probably doesn't have quite as much impact on that.
I had breakfast with a new friend I met on Friday, Gary, and Gary said, I have an even more radical thing. Move the infield back a little bit, but you know, not necessarily change the dimensions of the field, but just push everything back a little bit because the players
slightly longer base paths.
Yeah, slightly longer base paths. And I thought, 90 feet between bases. That's like sacrosanct.
That's
I don't know if you can do that.
100 feet between bases.
So, but I just thought it was interesting that he talked about throwing off flatter ground as being a way to do it. I kind of like to explore that a little bit more. So the Target Field thing we did the day before. I went to Target Field 3 times. First, to make sure I knew how to get there because I walked everywhere.
Just to like learn it.
Yeah. Second, we went on a tour, and they offered a tour, and it was like almost a 2-hour tour, not a 3-hour tour for you Gilligan's Island fans, but a 2-hour tour. And we went on the field first, right on. You know, you couldn't step on the grass,
but you could actually be out on the field.
And the groundskeeper comes up. He's the head groundskeeper, and he goes, "Yeah, I've been a groundskeeper. I was a groundskeeper in I can't remember if it was Pittsburgh, and he said, and in Washington, and now I'm the head groundskeeper here." So, of course, I said, so were you the head groundskeeper in Washington when they were at RFK and before they moved to Nats Park? He looks at me, he goes, "Yes, I was." He goes, and the RFK thing was, you know, I said, I really love to get this guy on the podcast.
Right,
to talk about
talking to a
that.
head's groundskeeper would be super interesting. Did you have any kind of insights on what is being like a head's groundskeeper? Like, what did he share with you guys?
He talked about the composition of the field. They get the dirt from Minnesota, but they bring the sod in from someplace else in the United States. And he said that when they built Target Field, and obviously it's an outdoor field, they put coils under the entire field so they can warm the grass up in February so they can grow grass to be ready for opening day because it'd be too cold. It's like, what a good idea. And obviously, if it snows a little bit, they can melt the snow. Obviously, if you got 20 inches of snow.
They can't use it, and they can't use it to dry the field out.
And so I thought that was just really an interesting, aspect of it. And they took us down into the dugout, and we went into the locker room.
How nice was the locker room?
The locker room was very nice. It was very nice. And what I saw when I first walked in there, first thing I noticed, is the two captains, Correa and I think Christian Vasquez, are the two captains. They're at the far end of the locker room, like that's the place where you go to talk to the captains. They have their own spot. Like that's interesting.
That's very interesting. I would have never known that.
And they have all of their shoes, and they have lots of shoes, and they're all like different colors, and I think different bottoms depending on what surface you might be playing on or what the conditions are that day. Yeah. And the shoes were very large. Like
they're all very big feet.
These are big men that play this game, and I didn't see a baseball player anywhere around there at all. But just by the nature of the size of the shoes,
wow,
these are very big people. So and Target Field was amazing, and we went into suites, and we kind of bumped around, and they took us on any place that you could go in Target Field. They took us. I ended up going to the restaurant the next night because I went in there, I scouted it out, and I think, okay, this is where I want to go. I've never been to a baseball stadium where first time I went, I didn't see a game, and then I knew where to go eat.
So how was the fan experience at Target Field?
They're really good. I don't know if you're familiar with the expression Minnesota nice.
No.
So that's a thing out there. Like, people from Minnesota are nice, and they're Minnesota nice. And so that's true. It's
It was
well.
really,
It's
they were
well
just really
earned.
nice.
Everybody's nice. Everybody's happy. We're at the ballpark.
Yeah.
You know, so like it's.
And it was a nice ballpark.
It was a really nice ballpark, and the Twins had won game one of a day-night doubleheader. I guess it was a rain.
So everybody was already in a good mood.
Well, I don't know, because it screwed things up a little bit because we had to wait outside for a really long time. I figured they'd let us in an hour and a half before first pitch, and an hour and 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we were still just getting ready to go in.
Ooh.
So I was a little impatient there, and the people were online going, "What's going on here?" But everybody was nice.
You got inside, and you all got inside the stadium.
Everybody was nice, and we sat down the left field line on the lowest section. It was not an expensive ticket. I assume the Twins were really good to SABR in terms of how they offered. They had their president of operations come in. They had all kinds of different people from the organization participate in the conference, including the players that we already mentioned. And the park was beautiful. You know, it is. Here's what I will say: it's a little newer than Citi Field. And Citi Field's a great ballpark. I say that all the time. It's even better.
Wow.
It's even better.
Yeah,
as a ballpark, it just is. So that was just a really good experience to get a chance to see a ballpark from sort of the inside.
And I mean, aside from the trip to the ballpark, we've also talked. We've been talking about all the different panels that you went to. Aside from the ones we've kind of already mentioned, were there any ones that like really stuck out to you, like in terms of the research one, or in terms of how to do baseball research, or any other ones in particular that you really enjoyed?
I enjoyed a lot of them, and some of them I kind of stumbled upon. Like the guy talking about Josh Gibson's, I think 868 home runs, and saying, nah, I'm not sure about that, basically, and saying we could only document like 300 or 400 of those.
Right, and so it's really hard for us to extrapolate out to such a high number past that.
But it was all done with, the idea from a research standpoint. And the thing about the SABR thing, all these panels, like some of these stuff is complicated. There's formulas up there, and you can see, and they have to have all their research verified and checked by somebody else within the organization.
Right. You have to be, you have to prove that what you're doing is actually correct. You can't just make the claim. You got to be able to back it up.
It's not like doing a podcast where we just say stuff.
Right. We can be wrong. We can be wrong all the time.
We're wrong all the time. But I said in the podcast recently when we did the 108 win teams that the Cubs won the 1906 World Series when they won 116 games. Wrong.
Oh.
That was the White Sox. The Cubs won in 1907 and
So it was
1908.
the Chicago team.
Right. So I messed that up, and it's left it for posterity because we're not going to go back and correct the episode. I did put it in the notes, but it's wrong. And so we get stuff wrong all the time. They are really focused on getting things right. One of the things that I thought was really fun was the head guy, Mark Armour, did a thing on the 1 millionth run scored in Major League Baseball. So I said, let me go see what this is. And he had his tongue so firmly implanted in his cheek when he did this because he said, well, basically, traditionally we say Bob Watson scored the 1 millionth run in 1975. They kind of calculated and all that kind of goes, no, I don't think so. So he timed all the games, what the average time was between innings and what it was and what was going on that night, and all these, and kind of came up with a different scenario where it wasn't Bob Watson that did that.
It was somebody else.
It was like 17 days before, and so he goes, "You're not buying this," and so because he knew he was with a bunch of researchers, and some of the premises that he took were wild stabs, but it allowed him to create this narrative.
That was very fun.
It was very fun. It was like a very sophisticated way of kind of not making fun of statistics, but just having fun with statistics.
Right, and I'm sure at a conference, at the Society for American Baseball Research, having fun with statistics is probably a big part of it.
Right, and the presenters, and you can go on SABR if you were to join SABR. I don't even know how much of it's public. You can actually watch these presentations that they did.
Wow.
I know if you're a member, you can, and I'm sure they have some of the content maybe that might be available to just to take a look at. And I just found myself in some of these, like the guy that talked about how there are no more lifetime 300 hitters, and he went through this whole litany, and had they been able to keep their average over 300 for their entire career, like nobody has done this for the most part. It's really, really hard to do. Like I never even thought about it, and I love stuff like that. Like that's super nerdy.
But when you think about it, it makes sense because now that guys have elongated their playing careers and fewer guys retire near the peak of their career, more and more guys are going to play out a bunch of substandard seasons where they hit like 280 to 260 and tank their average right at the end of their career.
Even the great Ty Cobb, I guess in his first few games, did not maintain a 300 average, even though his career average is 367. So he didn't have a 300 average for his entire career. And I just think that's really kind of an interesting premise. So that was a really good one. That was a good presentation. The Twins themselves, like I said, from the the last panel I went to was a panel on the future of broadcast, and they got into the whole regional sports networks, and Evan Dreilich from The Athletic was on this panel.
That's a big topic.
It was, and I could see that was not a very, that crowd was not too happy about the fact that they can't watch their team in a lot of markets.
Well, I'm going to say I do think it's interesting that the same crowd that complains and talks about how they don't watch a lot of current baseball is annoyed about regional sports networks and they can't watch their team, because it kind of feels like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth on that one.
Well, and let's talk about that, because, I did find, I don't know, say if it's a negative, it was a disappointment to speak to a number of people who said to me that they don't watch today's baseball. They don't watch baseball anymore. And I started to think, I was like, that's a shame. Now, because we do this podcast, right, I am way more hyper aware of what's going on in baseball than I probably would be if we were not doing this.
Or you'd be aware of what the Mets were doing and probably not a whole lot else.
I wouldn't be able to name lineups for other teams the way that I can, given the circumstances. So there's a different level of interest on my part. At the same time, I think it's hard for older people, and people even older than me. Let's say you're 70 years old or even older, and you grew up in the 60s and before 1969, when there were, at that point there were 2 leagues of 10 teams.
So before it was teams.
Before that, if it was before 1961, you had 2 leagues of 8 teams.
16 teams.
And you only played your own league unless you made the World Series.
So you really needed your team and like 7 other teams.
Right, so you had to know 200 players in your league that you were familiar with. That seems like doable.
That's pretty easy.
Right now we've got 30 teams. If you say 25 guys on the team, that's 750 players, and they all play each other all the time, right? Because they don't only play in the World Series. So that's a lot more people to follow, and so you feel like you don't know what the hell's going on.
And that seems to be a common complaint. That, you have these guys playing, and you get teams, and you're like, okay, wait, who's pitching and who's hitting? It's a bunch of guys you've never heard of. So I do understand that complaint, but I also think that it's like, well, it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. You never watch today's baseball. You're never going to know who these guys are.
Right, and then that broadcast panel kind of got into, there are some markets in which they don't have any games. I think Minnesota was one of them on broadcast TV. None. Right, and so at least even in New York here, in the New York area, we get a few games on the local broadcast network.
You get at least one a week.
So I that's bad for baseball. It's bad for fans, and
it makes growing the game a little bit harder, because if you're a kid trying to get into watching pro baseball, you better hope you have parents that want to pay for a sports package.
The president of the Twins, and his name is on here someplace. I'm sorry if I don't remember it. He made the point that the Major League Baseball, in his discussions with other, this is from the ownership perspective, that they want to have featured games more the way that it was mentioned, the NBA. How could you have an NBA game in the middle of the season between Oklahoma City and Philadelphia that's a compelling game for a fan who's not a fan of either team would want to watch? But the NBA has been able to do that.
Right, well, that's because they're very good at hyping up their players and the storylines that are going through the season. And the MLB hasn't quite figured out how to push the narratives quick enough to build up for those types of matchups.
And they're trying stuff we see, right? And we just saw that they're going to do a game at the Speedway in Tennessee where they've never played a game before.
Right, they're trying things. I think they're not
new venues.
Right, but I think new venues aren't as good as like being like, okay, you need to be able to be, okay, the Royals are going to New York to play the Yankees. There should be a whole bunch of promos about Bobby Witt Jr. coming to New York.
But even better if you took a team that maybe, let's say the Tigers are going to play I'm trying to think of a team that's a good team that isn't, the Brewers. Mm-hmm. So the Tigers are going to play the Brewers and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's, you have to know a little bit of baseball. There's no LeBron.
Right, well,
there's no Curry.
You got to start talking about, potential Cy Young candidate Tarek Skubal pitching against the division leader Brewers.
And the fans just don't know. The connection is not there at that level.
Right, especially because if you're a neutral fan, if you're somebody that doesn't watch, without those national games, without promoting that interest, there's a good chance you won't watch a single game that features some of these teams the entire season.
But I appreciated that they were willing to put on a session like that and have, discussion and take questions like this. So they took questions at the end of every session, obviously, and the questions were good questions. There was just a lot of respectfulness.
It seemed like the type of place where you would get
dissing. Nobody was. Everybody was very, cordial and respectful, and and if you didn't get to talk, you just sat back down. You didn't make a big deal about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I really liked that vibe there, from all the people. And that was probably one of the nicest things about it is none of this, put upon stuff from people at all. And I didn't talk about anything but baseball for 3 days. Like I had no conversation about anything else.
That must have been really nice.
Yeah, because that's why I'm there. I'm talking to people about baseball. I don't need to talk to them about anything else necessarily.
That's right. So I guess does any final thoughts on the trip overall, on the conference overall? Maybe what your favorite thing was.
The nerdiest thing, I'll tell you, the nerdiest thing that I saw. So this was a thing where a guy looked at. Okay, so we know that there's 24 less minutes for a baseball game today than there was before they instituted the pitch clock. Where did the 24 minutes go?
What comprises of the 24 minutes?
So he went through a whole analysis, and he divided the amount of times and came up with the fact that pitches, there's 15 minutes and 38 seconds less in terms of the time to pitch during the game because of the pitch clock and everything else. That represents 65% of the 24 minutes. Okay, so that's a big one. Batter transitions, right? The batter has to come out of the dugout and get to the circle, get to the plate and all that kind of stuff. 6 minutes and 12 seconds per game, which surprised me that it was that much. The second highest category at 25.8%. Mound visits used to take longer.
Right.
They take less now. It's down to 1:34. Used to be like 2.5 minutes.
Wow.
6.7%. And challenges, which you think challenges take a really long time.
They feel like they take forever.
32 seconds for the average challenge. Only 2.1%.
Right.
Right. So, well, you take all the challenges, and some of them that are really quick and easy, they balance out the ones that take a minute.
I feel like they take forever. Yeah.
So I thought, okay, so this is the height of nerdiness, that somebody took the time to go and try to build a model to come up
figure out with what amount of time are we saving and where.
And so the thing was that really surprised me more than anything else is I liked it. I loved it. I actually, it's really nerdy, geeky stuff, and I love this stuff. So if you're thinking about going to SABR, I think just the content alone, it makes it worth your consideration if you like baseball the way that we like baseball. I think you would have found it interesting, too. Yeah. There was a 35-year-old guy there from John Boy Media, and I thought, that could be you.
Yeah, sounds fun.
So it was a really good time. So give it a shot, folks. And it'll be in Dallas next year in late June in 2025. And I'm not sure yet that I'm going to go, but maybe.